Captain Jake Morrison walked slowly across the bridge of the USV Nightfall and looked at the dark space ahead. The ship moved through the Kepler Nebula like a ghost, making no sound and giving off no light that other ships could see. The crew had been out here for 6 months now, far from Earth and far from home, listening to alien voices talk across the stars. Lieutenant Amy Collins sat at her station with headphones on, her fingers dancing over the controls as she tried to catch more alien signals. She had been doing this job for 3 years now, but had never heard anything like what came through the speakers today. The alien voices sounded scared, and they kept talking about something called the Silent Hunters. Commander Lisa Brooks stood behind Amy and listened to the strange words coming from the speakers. The aliens spoke in their own language, but the computer changed their words into English. What they heard made no sense at first. The aliens talked about ships that could not be seen and weapons that struck without warning. They spoke of enemies that came from nowhere and vanished before anyone could fight back. Jake walked over to where his officers stood listening to the alien voices. He had commanded ships for 15 years but had never heard fear like this before. The aliens sounded like they were talking about monsters from old stories, not real ships that sailed between the stars. But as he listened more, he began to understand that these creatures were very real and very afraid. Chief Engineer Pete Davis came up from the lower decks with a tablet in his hands. His face looked worried as he showed Jake the numbers on his screen. Pete had been working all day to break the code that the aliens used to hide their messages. What he found made him want to tell the captain right away. The aliens were not just afraid of some unknown enemy that lived far away. They were afraid of ships that did not exist yet. They were afraid of weapons that had never been built. They were afraid of an enemy that had never fought in space before. They were afraid of humanity. Dr. Helen Carter came to the bridge carrying a thick book of notes. She had been studying these aliens for months, trying to learn how they thought and what made them different from humans. What she discovered today changed everything they thought they knew about the galaxy around them. The aliens had been watching Earth for many years. They had seen human ships fight on the oceans and human planes fight in the sky. They had studied how humans made war and how humans thought about fighting. Then they used big computers to guess what humans would do when they finally reached the stars. Amy played back the clearest alien message they had recorded. The voice belonged to someone important, maybe a leader or a general. The alien spoke about predictions and models and simulations. It talked about a race that fought without honor and struck without warning. It described ships that could hide in empty space and weapons that killed from great distances. Lisa looked at the star charts on her screen and tried to understand what the aliens meant. Human ships had never been to these star systems. Earth had never sent weapons to fight alien enemies, but somehow the aliens knew exactly what human warships would look like and how they would fight. Pete showed them the data he had decoded from the alien computers. The aliens had taken everything they knew about human warfare and fed it into machines that could think faster than any living mind. These machines had shown them pictures of the future, pictures of human ships that moved like shadows and struck like lightning. The aliens had seen human submarines that hunted under the ocean where no one could find them. They had watched human fighters that attacked from the sky without warning. They had studied human tactics that used tricks and lies to confuse enemies. When they imagined these same ideas used in space, they became terrified. Jake read through the alien messages one more time and began to understand why these creatures were so afraid. Every other race in the galaxy fought their wars like games with rules. They announced when they were coming. They fought in the open where everyone could see. They followed codes of honor that made war predictable and safe. Humans had never learned to fight that way. Humans had spent thousands of years learning how to win wars by any means necessary. They had created weapons that killed without being seen. They had built strategies that relied on surprise and deception. They had made war into an art form that focused on victory above all else. Amy found more alien messages that talked about the galactic community and how all the different races worked together to keep peace. They had rules about how wars should be fought and agreements about what weapons were acceptable. Every race followed these rules because they all thought the same way about fighting. But humans thought differently. The alien computers had shown them that humans would never follow their rules. Human ships would never announce themselves before attacking. Human weapons would never give enemies time to prepare. Human commanders would never choose honor over victory. Helen explained that the aliens had created a perfect picture of human space warfare without ever seeing a single human warship. They had predicted stealth technology that could make ships invisible. They had foreseen weapons systems that could strike across vast distances. They had imagined tactics that would make traditional alien defenses worthless. The crew of the Nightfall realized they were not just explorers anymore. They were scouts for a race that the entire galaxy already feared. The aliens had spent years preparing for a war that had never started, building defenses against enemies that did not yet exist, making plans to stop ships that were still just dreams in human minds. Jake gave orders to record everything and send it back to Earth immediately. The people back home needed to know that humanity was not alone in the galaxy, and that their new neighbors were already afraid of them. The aliens had made one terrible mistake in their calculations. They had predicted what humans would build, but they had also shown humans exactly what the galaxy expected them to become. The alien enforcement fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system exactly 1 year after humanity had signed the peace agreement with the Galactic Council. The massive ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with lights that could be seen from Earth without telescopes. At the center of the fleet was the Eternal Glory, a Vithrak dreadnought that was larger than any city on Earth. Admiral Caroline Baker watched the alien ships from her command center deep inside the asteroid base at Ceres. Caroline had spent the past year preparing for this moment, knowing that the Galactic Council would eventually send someone to check whether humanity was keeping its promises. The aliens had come expecting to find a defenseless world that had followed their rules and built no warships. Instead, they found exactly what they had been looking for, which was nothing at all. The alien fleet spread out across the solar system and began scanning for signs of human military activity. Their sensors were incredibly powerful and could detect energy signatures from millions of kilometers away. They searched every planet, every moon, every space station that humans had built since joining the galactic community. Captain Tony Morris commanded the USV Spectre from its hiding place inside a hollowed-out asteroid near Jupiter. Tony had been born on a military base and had served on ships since he was old enough to enlist. He understood that this was not just another military operation, but a test that would determine whether humanity had a future among the stars. The alien search teams found exactly what they expected to find. Human ships were small and lightly armed, designed for exploration and scientific research. Human space stations were devoted to manufacturing and communication, with no sign of weapons production. Human military forces consisted of a few patrol boats that were barely capable of defending Earth's orbital facilities. Everything the aliens saw confirmed that humanity had kept its word. The predicted warships did not exist. The feared weapons had never been built. Human military thinking had been redirected toward peaceful purposes that posed no threat to galactic civilization. The enforcement fleet began, preparing to leave the solar system and report their success to the Council. That was when the Ghost Protocol began. The USV Phantom appeared on alien sensors for exactly 3 seconds before vanishing again. The alien computers recorded the contact and tried to classify what they had detected. The energy signature was too small to be a warship and too fast to be a cargo vessel. The sensor profile matched no known type of spacecraft in their databases. Before the alien commanders could decide what they had seen, the contact was gone. Their most powerful sensors could find no trace of whatever had been there. The fleet increased its scanning intensity and sent patrol ships to investigate the area where the Phantom contact had appeared. They found nothing, Admiral. Caroline watched from her command center as the alien fleet tried to make sense of what their sensors had detected. The aliens were following their standard procedures for investigating unknown contacts, which made their actions easy to predict. Caroline had studied these procedures for months and knew exactly how the alien commanders would respond to each new development. The USV Wraith activated its electronic warfare systems and began feeding false information into the alien sensor networks. Suddenly, the alien computers were detecting massive fleets of human warships in locations where no ships existed. The false signals showed hundreds of vessels moving through the outer solar system, all using stealth technology that made them nearly impossible to track. The alien fleet commanders found themselves facing a nightmare scenario that matched their worst predictions about human warfare. Their sensors were telling them that humanity had not only broken the peace agreement, but had built a fleet that was larger and more advanced than anything their computers had calculated. Captain Nick Foster brought the Phantom out of hiding and began the most dangerous part of the operation. Nick had to get close enough to the alien fleet to plant signal boosters on their ships without being detected or destroyed. One mistake would not only cost him his life but would reveal that humanity possessed exactly the kind of warships the galaxy feared. The Phantom approached the alien formation using an attack pattern that no alien commander would expect. Instead of coming from the direction that offered the best tactical advantage, the Phantom approached from the angle that would be most difficult for alien weapons to cover. Instead of attacking the strongest ships first, it targeted the vessels that were furthest from the main fleet. Nick used the Phantom's stealth systems to attach small devices to the hulls of 3 alien ships. These signal boosters would record everything that happened inside those vessels and broadcast it across the galaxy on frequencies that every major civilization monitored for intelligence gathering. The alien crews had no idea that their private communications were being transmitted to their enemies and allies alike. They spoke freely about their fears and their confusion as they tried to understand what was happening to them. These conversations would become the most important intelligence coup in galactic history. Captain Tony Morris moved the Spectre into position to execute the most crucial part of the Ghost Protocol. Tony had to disable several alien ships without destroying them, proving that human weapons could penetrate alien defenses while demonstrating the restraint that separated civilization from barbarism. The Spectre used electromagnetic pulse weapons that had been designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in alien technology. These weapons could overload alien computer systems and shut down their engines without killing anyone aboard the targeted ships. The alien crews would be left alive but helpless, floating in space while their rescue teams tried to figure out what had gone wrong. One by one, alien ships throughout the fleet began losing power and drifting helplessly through space. Their crews sent frantic messages describing weapons that struck without warning from enemies they could not see. The alien commanders tried to regroup their forces but found that their standard tactics were useless against an enemy that refused to fight according to their rules. The signal boosters that Nick had planted recorded every word of these communications and broadcast them across the galaxy. Within hours, every major civilization was listening to alien military officers describe their helplessness against human stealth technology and psychological warfare. The recordings revealed something that no amount of computer modeling could have predicted. The alien crews were not just tactically defeated but psychologically broken. They had been trained to fight enemies who would announce their attacks and follow rules of engagement. When faced with an opponent that used stealth and surprise, their entire military doctrine collapsed. Admiral Caroline gave the order to end the Ghost Protocol demonstration. The human ships vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving the alien fleet to count their disabled vessels and try to explain what had happened to them. The aliens had come to the solar system looking for evidence that humanity had broken the peace agreement. Instead, they had become evidence themselves. Evidence that human warships were everything the predictions had said they would be and more. Evidence that galactic military traditions were helpless against opponents who fought to win instead of fighting for honor. Evidence that the balance of power in the galaxy had already changed in ways that no one had expected. The enforcement fleet limped away from the solar system with nearly a third of their ships operating on emergency power. They carried with them the knowledge that humanity had not only built the predicted warships but had used them with a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded every computer model. But the most important thing they carried was fear. Fear that had been recorded and broadcast for the entire galaxy to hear. Fear that would change everything about how civilized species thought about war and peace and the price of both, in a universe where humans now sailed between the stars. 3 months after the Nightfall returned to Earth, a massive alien ship appeared at the edge of the solar system. The ship was beautiful and terrible at the same time, made of materials that shined like crystal and metal that seemed to bend light around itself. It sent a message in perfect English asking to speak with the leaders of humanity. Ambassador Roy Mitchell had never thought he would be the first human to meet aliens from another world. He had spent his life working with different countries on Earth, helping them solve their problems without fighting. Now he found himself on a shuttle heading toward the alien ship, carrying the hopes and fears of his entire species. The alien vessel was called the Harmony of Voices, and it served as a meeting place for something called the Galactic Council. Roy walked through corridors that were too tall and too wide for humans, past rooms filled with strange lights and sounds that his mind could not understand. Everything about this place told him that humanity was very small and very young, compared to the civilizations that built it. Admiral Kate Phillips came with Roy as the representative of Earth's military forces. She had commanded ships and fought in wars, but nothing had prepared her for what she saw when they entered the council chamber. 12 different types of aliens sat around a table that seemed to float in the air, each one stranger than the last. The speaker for the council was a creature that looked like it was made of living crystal. It stood 3 meters tall and its voice sounded like wind chimes when it spoke. The speaker welcomed the humans and explained that this meeting had been planned for many years, ever since the alien computers had finished their calculations about human warfare. Dr. Ben Richards sat quietly and listened as the aliens explained their civilization. Ben had spent his life studying how humans fought wars throughout history, from the first battles with sticks and stones to the great conflicts that had shaped the modern world. He understood better than anyone else why these aliens were afraid. The speaker showed them pictures of alien warships that looked more like floating cities than fighting machines. The ships were huge and covered with lights that could be seen from great distances. They moved slowly and announced themselves with music and signals that told everyone who they were and where they were going. Commander Steve Johnson looked at these alien ships and tried not to laugh. Steve had served on human warships that were designed to hide and strike fast. These alien vessels looked like they were built for parades, not battles. They had no armor in the places where human ships would put their strongest protection. They had weapons that looked powerful but were mounted in positions where enemies could see them coming. The aliens explained their rules of war with great pride. Before any battle, both sides would meet and discuss their differences. They would give each other time to prepare their weapons and choose their battle formations. They would fight in open space where everyone could watch and judge who was winning. When one side was clearly beaten, they would surrender with honor and the winners would treat them with respect. Kate listened to these rules and felt her heart sink. Every one of these rules would make it easier for human forces to destroy alien fleets. The aliens were telling their enemies exactly when and where they would attack. They were giving their opponents time to prepare ambushes and traps. They were fighting in ways that human military schools taught their students never to do. The speaker then showed them what their computers had predicted about human space warfare. The images that appeared in the air above the table made Roy feel sick to his stomach. He saw human ships that looked like dark shadows moving through space without making any sound. He saw weapons that could destroy targets from distances so great that the enemy would never know where the attack came from. The alien predictions showed human fleets that would never fight fair battles. Human ships would hide behind asteroids and attack when alien vessels were not ready to fight. Human weapons would strike at supply lines and support ships instead of facing enemy warships directly. Human commanders would use lies and tricks to make alien forces fight each other instead of fighting humans. Ben had to admit that the alien computers had done their job well. Everything they predicted matched the way humans had always fought their wars. Humans had learned long ago that the only rule in war was to win, and that meant using every advantage they could find. Honor was something for after the victory, not something that should stop you from achieving it. The council made their position very clear to the human visitors. Humanity could join the galactic community and learn to live in peace with their neighbors. They could share in the knowledge and technology that the older civilizations had developed over thousands of years. They could become part of something greater than any single world could achieve alone. But there were conditions that humanity had to accept. Earth could never build the kind of warships that the alien computers had predicted. Human military forces could never use the tactics and strategies that had made them successful in their own history. Humanity had to promise to fight the way that civilized races fought, with honor and rules and respect for their enemies. If humanity refused these conditions, the Council would have no choice but to protect itself. The combined fleets of 12 civilizations would come to the solar system and make sure that humans never had the chance to build their predicted warships. It would not be a war because humans would have no way to fight back against such overwhelming force. Roy asked for time to take this offer back to Earth and discuss it with the leaders of all human nations. The speaker agreed but warned that the Council could not wait long for an answer. Every day that passed was another day for humans to work on the weapons and ships that the galaxy feared. As the human delegation prepared to leave the alien ship, Kate noticed something that the aliens had not mentioned. Every one of the 12 species on the council was afraid. Not just cautious or concerned, but truly terrified. They had built their entire civilization around the idea that war could be controlled and made safe. The thought of an enemy that would not follow their rules had shaken them to their core. Steve realized that the aliens had made a crucial mistake in their calculations. They had predicted what humans would build and how humans would fight, but they had also revealed their own weaknesses. They had shown humans exactly what kind of enemy the galaxy was not prepared to face. They had given away the secret of their own defeat while trying to prevent it. The journey back to Earth gave the human team time to think about what they had learned. The galaxy was not the empty frontier that humans had dreamed about exploring. It was already full of civilizations that had their own ideas about how newcomers should behave. But these civilizations had also shown that they could be beaten by anyone willing to fight the way humans had always fought. Roy knew that the decision facing humanity was bigger than any choice they had ever made before. They could accept the alien terms and become junior members of a galactic community that would never fully trust them, or they could reject the offer and face the consequences of 12 civilizations that were already preparing for war against ships that did not yet exist. 6 months after the Ghost Protocol demonstration, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The recordings of alien crews describing their terror at facing invisible human warships had spread to every civilized world, and the reaction was not what the Galactic Council had expected. Instead of uniting against the human threat, the galaxy's younger civilizations began to wonder why their mighty fleets had been so easily outmaneuvered by a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. Ambassador Julia Davis found herself busier than she had ever imagined possible. Julia had replaced Roy Mitchell as Earth's primary diplomatic representative, and her job had transformed from begging for acceptance into managing requests from dozens of alien civilizations that wanted to learn human military strategies. The unified Galactic Council was fracturing as member species began pursuing independent relationships with humanity. The first civilization to break ranks was the Kelvani Republic, a collection of worlds that had been forced to accept junior status in the Council hierarchy. The Kelvani had watched their own fleet struggle against pirate raids for decades while following galactic rules of engagement that seemed designed to protect criminals more than victims. When they heard the recordings of human ships disabling enemy vessels without warning, they saw an opportunity to change their situation. Captain Alex Thompson commanded the expanded human fleet from the new base that had been built on the dark side of Luna. Alex had been promoted after Nick Foster was reassigned to training duties, and his job was to manage the delicate balance between demonstrating human capabilities and avoiding the kind of arms race that could destroy galactic civilization. The irony was not lost on him that humans were now being asked to teach restraint to species that had once demanded humanity accept limits on its own military development. The Kelvani delegation arrived at the Luna base in a small ship that looked nothing like the ceremonial vessels that other galactic species used for diplomatic missions. The Kelvani had stripped away the decorative lights and unnecessary communications equipment that made their ships visible to enemy sensors. They wanted to learn how to make their fleets as invisible and effective as human warships had proven to be. Dr. Helen Carter led the team of scientists and military advisors who worked with alien representatives. Helen had spent years studying galactic psychology and now found herself in the position of teaching aliens how to think more like humans. It was a responsibility that she took very seriously because she understood that the wrong lessons could turn the galaxy into a battlefield where no one would be safe. The Kelvani were followed by the Zephyrian Confederation, a group of worlds that had been fighting a losing war against the Vithrak Empire for over a century. The Zephyrians had watched their homeworlds burn because their military traditions required them to fight honorable battles against an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. They wanted to learn human tactics that could level the playing field and give their people a chance to survive. Commander Dan Roberts established the first interstellar naval academy in the converted mining facility on Titan. Dan had been an instructor at human military schools before being assigned to train alien officers in the principles of asymmetric warfare. His students came from civilizations that had been fighting the same way for thousands of years, and he had to teach them to abandon everything they thought they knew about military strategy. The curriculum at the Academy focused on the fundamental differences between human and galactic approaches to warfare. Human military doctrine was based on the assumption that any fair fight was a failure of intelligence and planning. Human commanders were trained to achieve their objectives with minimum casualties to their own forces, regardless of whether their methods were considered honorable by their enemies. The alien students struggled with concepts that human military academies taught to first-year cadets. The idea of attacking supply lines instead of enemy warships seemed cowardly to species that had been raised to believe in glorious battles between opposing fleets. The concept of using deception and misdirection to avoid fighting entirely was almost impossible for aliens to accept, but the recordings from the Ghost Protocol demonstration provided undeniable proof that these human methods worked. Alien military officers who had commanded fleets for decades had been reduced to helpless confusion by tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. The evidence could not be ignored, even by species whose entire culture was built around military honor and tradition. The older civilizations, like the Vithrak Empire, tried to maintain the previous galactic order by condemning human tactics as barbaric and uncivilized. They organized conferences and summits where they denounced humanity's influence on galactic military development. They sent diplomatic protests to every world that had requested human military advisors or training programs, but their protests fell on deaf ears because their own citizens had heard the recordings too. Vithrak civilians began asking why their supposedly invincible fleet had been so easily defeated by human ships that used primitive technology. Young Vithrak officers began studying human military history and questioning why their own traditions required them to fight in ways that guaranteed maximum casualties for minimum strategic advantage. The USV Shadow and USV Eclipse, humanity's newest vessels, served as mobile training platforms that could visit alien worlds and demonstrate human military techniques in controlled environments. These ships were designed not for combat but for education, showing alien crews how stealth technology could be integrated into existing fleet structures without completely abandoning traditional ship designs. Captain Lisa Brooks commanded the Shadow on its first training mission to the Andorian system, where a local defense force was struggling to protect mining colonies from raiders. The Andorians had followed galactic military protocols for months, sending warnings to the raiders and offering to negotiate before engaging in combat. The raiders had used this time to study Andorian tactics and develop countermeasures that made conventional attacks ineffective. Lisa demonstrated human approach to the same problem. Instead of warning the raiders or offering to negotiate, human-trained Andorian forces tracked the pirate ships to their hidden base and disabled their entire fleet while the crews were sleeping. The operation took less than 6 hours and resulted in no casualties on either side. The raiders were captured, and their victims were freed without the prolonged conflict that galactic protocols would have required. Word of the Andorian success spread throughout the galaxy, faster than any official diplomatic communication. Worlds that had been dealing with similar problems for years suddenly had proof that human methods could solve their security issues quickly and efficiently. The demand for human military advisors increased exponentially as civilizations realized that their traditional approaches to warfare were not just ineffective but actively counterproductive. The transformation of galactic military thinking accelerated as more species adopted human-inspired tactics and technologies. Ships that had once announced their presence with bright lights and ceremonial music began operating in stealth mode. Fleets that had once fought according to rigid formations and predetermined battle plans began using flexible strategies that adapted to changing circumstances. Within 2 years of the Ghost Protocol demonstration, the galaxy's military balance had shifted completely. No major civilization still relied entirely on traditional tactics, because any fleet that fought according to the old rules would be destroyed by enemies who had learned to fight like humans. The arms race that the Galactic Council had tried to prevent had happened anyway, but it was a race toward human-style efficiency rather than traditional galactic firepower. The final irony was that humanity had achieved exactly what the alien computers had predicted, but through teaching rather than conquest. Every major fleet in the galaxy now included ships that could move unseen through space and strike without warning. The Void no longer feared humanity's silent warships, because every civilization had learned to build their own versions of the vessels that had once seemed so terrifying. But the galaxy had gained something more valuable than new weapons or tactics. It had learned that survival sometimes required abandoning tradition and embracing change. The species that adapted to human military thinking thrived in the new galactic order, while those that clung to outdated concepts of honorable warfare found themselves increasingly irrelevant in a universe where victory belonged to those who could learn and evolve. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through superior force or advanced technology. They had transformed it by proving that there were better ways to think about conflict and competition. In teaching the galaxy to fight like humans, they had created a new kind of civilization where intelligence and adaptability mattered more than tradition and ceremony. The stars belonged to those who could change, and humanity had shown everyone else how to embrace that change. President Claire Anderson stood at the window of her office in the rebuilt Geneva complex and looked out at the lake, where diplomats from every nation on Earth had gathered to decide humanity's future. The alien ultimatum had been delivered 6 weeks ago, and the debates had not stopped since then. Every government, every military leader, every scientist wanted their voice heard before humanity gave its answer to the galaxy. General Paul Wright entered the room carrying a thick folder of reports from military commanders around the world. Paul had spent 40 years in the army and had fought in more wars than he liked to remember. He understood better than most people what it meant to face an enemy that had overwhelming advantages in numbers and technology. Paul laid out the harsh facts for the president and her advisors. Earth had 12 space stations, 37 ships that could travel between planets, and weapons that were designed for fighting other humans. The Galactic Council had thousands of worlds, millions of ships, and technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had ever built. A war between Earth and the Council would last about as long as it took the alien fleets to reach the solar system. Admiral Rachel Stone sat across from Paul and shook her head at his assessment. Rachel had commanded submarine fleets in the Pacific and understood something that many people seem to forget. Wars were not always won by the side with the most ships or the biggest weapons. Sometimes the smaller force could win by fighting in ways that the larger enemy did not expect. Rachel opened her own folder and showed the president a different set of numbers. The alien ships they had seen were huge and powerful, but they were also slow and easy to track. The alien weapons were impressive, but they were designed for fighting other aliens who would announce their attacks and fight fair battles. The alien commanders followed rules and traditions that made their actions predictable. Dr. Sam Turner came into the meeting carrying a small device that looked like a piece of alien technology. Sam ran the Terra Research Institute, and his team had been studying every piece of information they could gather about the Galactic Council. What they had discovered in the past month had changed everything humanity thought they knew about their new neighbors. Sam activated the device and showed the president how it worked. The aliens had given them this communicator as a diplomatic gift, never thinking that human scientists would take it apart and learn how it was built. What they found inside revealed the greatest weakness of galactic civilization. Every piece of alien technology followed the same patterns and used the same basic principles. The aliens had spent thousands of years perfecting their designs until they worked exactly the way they wanted them to work. But this perfection had made their technology predictable and easy to understand once you knew what to look for. Chief of Staff Maria Rodriguez coordinated the meeting with representatives from every major space agency on Earth. Maria had managed international projects before, but nothing as large or as secret as what they were planning now. If humanity was going to reject the alien ultimatum, they needed to be ready for the consequences. The plan that emerged from weeks of secret meetings was both simple and ambitious. Earth would accept the alien terms and agree to join the Galactic Council as a peaceful member of the galactic community. But while the diplomats were signing treaties and making promises, the real work would be happening in hidden bases throughout the solar system. Captain Nick Foster had been chosen to lead the most important part of the project. Nick had commanded experimental ships for the Space Force and had experience with technology that pushed the limits of what was possible. His job was to take everything the aliens feared about human warfare and turn it into reality. The construction sites were hidden inside asteroid mining operations that had been running for years. To anyone watching from the outside, these facilities looked like ordinary industrial complexes that were harvesting resources from space rocks. But inside the hollowed-out asteroids, teams of engineers and technicians were building something that had never existed before. The first ship they built was called the USV Phantom, and it was everything the alien computers had predicted human warships would become. The Phantom was small and fast and covered with materials that absorbed sensor beams instead of reflecting them back. Its weapons were designed to strike from great distances, and its engines could move the ship without creating the energy signatures that alien sensors were trained to detect. Nick worked with his crew to develop new ways of fighting that took advantage of everything they had learned about alien psychology and tactics. The aliens expected their enemies to behave in certain ways and follow certain rules. Human ships would do none of these things. The Phantom would never announce itself before attacking. It would never fight fair battles in open space where both sides could see each other clearly. It would never give enemies time to prepare their defenses or call for help. It would appear without warning, strike with devastating force, and vanish before anyone could respond. But the Phantom was just the beginning. The second ship they built was called the USV Wraith, and it specialized in electronic warfare that could confuse and blind alien sensors. The Wraith could make alien computers think they were seeing things that were not there, or hide things that were really there. It could turn the advanced alien technology against itself. The third ship was the USV Spectre, and its job was to prove that human predictions about alien weaknesses were correct. The Spectre carried weapons that were designed specifically to exploit the vulnerabilities they had found in alien ship designs. It could disable alien vessels without destroying them, leaving their crews alive but helpless to fight back. Each ship was crewed by volunteers who understood that they were not just serving their own country, but representing the entire human species. These crews trained in secret facilities where they learned to think like the aliens expected them to think. They studied alien tactics and psychology until they could predict what their enemies would do in any situation. The most important part of the project was not the ships themselves, but the message they would send. The aliens were afraid of human warships because their computers had shown them how effective these vessels would be. But predictions were just numbers and theories until someone proved them right. Maria coordinated with intelligence agencies around the world to plant the right information in the right places. The aliens were still watching Earth and listening to human communications. They needed to see exactly what they expected to see and hear exactly what they expected to hear. The alien observers saw construction projects that looked like peaceful space stations. They heard radio chatter about scientific missions and exploration programs. They detected energy signatures that matched civilian spacecraft and mining equipment. Everything appeared to confirm that humanity was following the terms of their agreement with the Galactic Council. But deep inside the asteroid facilities, teams of engineers were putting finishing touches on weapons that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. These were not just tools of war, but instruments of psychological warfare that would strike at the heart of everything the aliens believed about themselves and their civilization. President Anderson signed the official agreement with the Galactic Council in a ceremony that was broadcast across both Earth and alien worlds. She promised that humanity would never build the warships that the alien computers had predicted. She gave her word that human military forces would follow galactic rules and fight with honor and respect for their enemies. Every word she spoke was true at the time she said it. The ships hidden in the asteroid bases were not the warships the aliens had predicted, because they were something much more dangerous. They were proof that human ingenuity could exceed any prediction, and that the galaxy's fears had been justified in ways that no computer could calculate.